Hello and welcome to another An Old Man Watches. And today we're going to be talking about Horrors of Spider Island from 1962. Sort of. We'll get to that. So in this film, producer Gary Webster needs 7 women to accompany him to Singapore, where he's going to put on some kind of somewhat risque song and dance show. So, he needs women who are willing to shake their moneymakers, and his talent scout duly delivers a bunch of attractive young women who are willing to do exactly that. And so Webster, his assistant, and the dancers all board a plane for Asia. But they don't get there. Instead, their plane crashes into the Pacific Ocean. Fortunately for Webster, he and his assistant and all of the ladies and nobody else survived to be swept ashore on a tiny island. It's very convenient how only the characters that we've met survive the experience, isn't it? It turns out that the island has a pleasant climate and plenty of fresh water. So, there are worse places to be washed up. And things begin to look up even more when they discover a pickaxe lying in the undergrowth. Maybe this island is not as isolated as they thought. That good news turns rather more sinister, however, when they find the owner of the pickaxe strung up in the largest and least convincing, clearly being made of ropes, spiderweb you've ever seen. Still, dead or not, giant spiderweb or not, the man left behind a cabin, and they're not in a position to pass up on ready-made shelter, so they settle in. The ladies in particular settle into a routine of swanning around the island in skimpy outfits. Webster, however, a rather more macabre fate awaits him, and perhaps eventually for the women as well. Dun dun dun. So, what's interesting to talk about with this film? Well, a couple of things, which is why we're talking about it. So first of all, as I kind of alluded to earlier, this is a 1962 film, or actually a 1962 version of a 1960 film. So this is a West German film, because, it's made back in the days when we had 2 Germanys. It was released in its home country in 1960, I believe. It didn't make it to the US until 2 years later, and it initially came into the Anglosphere under the title It's Hot in Paradise. Now that title and Horrors of Spider Island sound like 2 pretty different movies, don't they? And that's not an unfair kind of assessment of the components of the film itself, because something like 80% of the runtime is more or less a campy castaway film, with barely clad women swimming, dancing, squabbling, catfighting, generally, doing things with not many clothes on, basically. Only the remaining 20% of the film is about the promised spider-related horrors, despite the fact that obviously that image that you're seeing here is very much focused on the horrors. The movie itself is not. Now, the version of the movie I saw ran for 75 minutes and is similarly an all-audiences cut, though, it's all audiences in the sense that there is no actual explicit nudity of any kind. There's still a lot of camera ogling of the female cast members who are, in bikinis or, their underwear. So yes, the producer, Wolf Hartwig, was apparently sort of known for doing straight-up sexploitation films, and yeah, so I imagine the longer version from a quick check on IMDb does have some actual nudity, like the original German release does have some actual nudity. The version I saw did not. So yeah, so there's that disconnect of, is this a movie about monsters or is this a movie about memories? Secondly, I've already mentioned the laughable effort at a giant web that this film offers. It also features the most hysterically ill-advised giant spider puppet I've ever seen. And I have seen Giant Spider Invasion, which is kind of infamous for its giant spider puppet. The spider in this film plays a relatively minor role. It's then replaced by, frankly, an only slightly less awful man spider, who is the film's main antagonist. If you can call him an antagonist, since he actually barely does anything. This is Webster, who becomes a mutant of some kind after being bitten by the big spider. So basically what I'm saying here is that the monster elements of this movie are more likely to provoke snickers than scares. And, perhaps given that at the end of the day, this is really mostly a movie about attractive ladies not wearing very many clothes, the campness of the effects might be entirely deliberate. Certainly, I don't feel they actually detract from the film. If the film was trying to be scary, the badness of the effects would be an issue. The film is not trying to be scary, or at least I don't feel like it's trying to scare me, and therefore the effects, are not such a big issue. Which brings us to my final point, which is that sometimes less can be more. As I said earlier, I watched the all audiences version of this film. It's about 10 minutes shorter than the original release, and I'm actually glad that I saw this version, because sometimes less is more. First of all, I don't think the film needs 10 more minutes of ladies cavorting around in bikinis. It's got heaps already. The plot is pretty slight to this film. There's not a whole lot of depth to it. 75 minutes is plenty long enough to tell it. So yeah, I don't think the movie needed 10 more minutes. Second, I think if the movie had gone all the way in terms of nudity, it would feel like a weird aberration. Like, to have a couple of scenes where, they actually get their bosoms out after, like, basically 75 minutes of very carefully not actually showing anything, it would just feel gratuitous and unnecessary. And third, given the overall tone of lighthearted titillation of that the movie has, the absence of real menace, despite all of the dangerous monster hyperbole you can see on your screen, is probably a good call. To have a monster that was genuinely scary would be a real tonal shift. And I think that you would really feel that disconnect there between the two elements. Right now, there's no disconnect between the two elements because the scary bits are not really scary and they still involve scantily clad ladies, so they tie in better. Now, I'm not saying in any way that this makes the movie good. It's not a good film. It's a bad film. It's a cheaply made film. It's a movie that is, as I said, is basically all about having attractive young women in not many clothes wander around on screen for you for 75 minutes. But, in terms of being a silly, sleazy bit of 60s exploitation, I did enjoy it, and I think I enjoyed it because it's so silly, and it never quite steps all of the way into being real exploitation because they cut those bits out for this version. So that's The Horrors of Spider Island. Next time, I'm going to talk about some 70s exploitation, the Cheerleaders collection, which is quite a different animal from The Horrors of Spider Island. That's next time. In the meantime, thanks for watching this one, and I hope you enjoyed it.